We learned today that actress Diane Keaton has died in California.
Michael, is it true?
Michael, why did you come here?
How long have you been back?
I mean, do you have that issue at all with your face?
The world woke to quiet disbelief on the morning of October 11, 2025. Diane Keaton, Hollywood's eternal eccentric, the woman with the laugh that could fill a room and the hat that became her crown, was gone. But before she left, she did something no one expected. In her final recorded interview, filmed only months before her passing, she finally spoke softly.
Or charged with, like something that's fallen apart in your life, and so
Carefully about the man who had shaped her heart for half a century, Al Pacino. For decades, fans had speculated about them. They were cinema's most mysterious lovers, two opposites orbiting the same star. He, the brooding method actor who built walls. She, the fearless romantic who tore them down. Their chemistry burned on screen in The Godfather and flickered in whispers off it. And then silence, until now. What did Diane Keaton reveal in her last words about Al Pacino? What truth lay behind the myth of Hollywood's most complicated love story? This is the untold farewell between two legends. To understand what Diane Keaton's confession meant, you have to return to where it all began, 1971. She was 30-something, still auditioning for commercials, when she landed a small part in a new mob film by a young director named Francis Ford Coppola. That film would become The Godfather, and across from her, playing Michael Corleone, was a wiry, dark-eyed stage actor from the Bronx, Al Pacino. They were strangers then, two misfits in a world of powerful men. Yet from the first table read, something sparked. Crew members would later recall how Diane's laughter would light up Pacino's intensity. He'd brood, she'd tease. He'd disappear into character. She'd pull him back into the moment. In the film, Kay Adams was the outsider drawn into Michael's dangerous orbit. Off-screen, Diane became something similar, a woman who loved the genius and endured the distance. Through The Godfather Part 2 and Part 3, their bond deepened, but not in the usual Hollywood way. There were no red carpet displays, no tabloid contracts. Instead, it was quiet dinners, long silences, and years of uncertainty. By the late 70s, Keaton was a household name. Her turn in Annie Hall had made her the face of neurotic, modern romance. Pacino, meanwhile, was the method actor's method actor, vanishing into roles that consumed him. They loved each other in flashes, deep, brilliant, chaotic flashes, but never built a home together. He was the love of my life, Diane would later admit in earlier interviews, but he just couldn't commit. Their relationship ended sometime in the early 80s. She moved on to photography, directing, writing, he to a series of intense roles and relationships. Yet neither truly escaped the other's shadow. Fans speculated endlessly. Were they still in touch? Had they reconciled? Why had Diane never married? But here's where it gets complicated. Because while the public adored the image of the quirky romantic and the tortured genius, the truth revealed only in her final interview was far more human, fragile, and quietly heroic. And that's where everything changed. It was a gray spring afternoon in 2025 when the producers of Inside Hollywood Legends sat down with Diane Keaton at her Beverly Hills home. The camera crew expected nostalgia stories of Woody Allen, of Reds, of Something's Gotta Give. Instead, she steered the conversation somewhere else. Wearing one of her trademark wide-brimmed hats, she smiled and said, "Everyone always asks about The Godfather, but they never ask about what it cost." For a moment, the room fell still. She talked about Al Pacino not as the icon, but as the man she once waited for. He was magnetic, she said. You couldn't ignore him, but he lived in a world you couldn't reach. Then came the line that made headlines only after her death. "I spent years thinking I wasn't enough for him, and then I realized he didn't think he was enough for anyone." Those words reframed decades of rumor. What once looked like rejection now sounded like two people forever trapped by the same insecurity. She admitted she'd kept letters, pages of unsent thoughts written through the years, some after seeing him win his Oscar for Scent of a Woman, others after random calls that ended in awkward silences. When asked if she ever stopped loving him, she laughed softly. "Love isn't something you switch off. You just learn to live around it." The interviewer tried to move on, But Diane lingered. She spoke of the last time they met at an Academy tribute. Al Pacino had held her hand and whispered, "You'll always be my Kay." She smiled that day but cried later in the car.
I remember it and I love it, and I love you forever. Thank you.
And though she didn't say it directly, the subtext was clear. Some connections never resolve, they just evolve. By the time the camera stopped rolling, everyone in that room felt it that this was more than reminiscence. It was closure. A month later, Diane's health reportedly began to decline. Her friends said she grew reflective, spending long afternoons on her balcony overlooking Los Angeles, surrounded by photo albums, her dog Reggie, and the letters she'd finally decided to archive. And then came the part nobody saw coming, what she decided to do with those letters next. In her final years, Diane Keaton remained the same paradox. She'd always been vibrant and elusive. Publicly, she radiated optimism. Privately, friends say she struggled with bouts of loneliness, especially during the isolation of recent years. Unlike many stars of her generation, she never married. "It wasn't by design," she once said. "It just never fit." But in 2024, after being diagnosed with an undisclosed illness, something she described only as the reason I need to slow down, Diane began revisiting her past. Those close to her recall that Al Pacino resurfaced in her conversations, not in bitterness, but in gratitude. "He gave me so much to think about," she told a friend. "He showed me the beauty and danger of loving an artist." Behind the laughter and eccentric charm lay a lifetime of complex choices. She had been America's muse, Woody Allen's creative partner, Warren Beatty's collaborator, and an icon of independence. Yet she confessed in private journals later confirmed by family that she often wondered what a settled life with Pacino might have looked like. Her longtime assistant recalled finding Diane late one night, surrounded by boxes of old photographs. She wasn't sad, the assistant said. She was sorting memories. It felt like she was preparing something. That something turned out to be a private memoir, handwritten, titled Notes to Al. She never intended it for publication, but she wanted her children, adopted daughter Dexter and son Duke, to understand the kind of love that shaped her. As her condition worsened, she reportedly reached out to Al Pacino through mutual friends. Whether they spoke directly remains unclear. Some sources suggest they shared one final phone call that lasted less than 10 minutes but carried decades of unspoken emotion. Others insist she simply sent a letter. Either way, what followed was a silence that spoke volumes. Friends say that during her final summer, she watched The Godfather Part 2 again alone, in her living room. When the scene came where Kay tells Michael she aborted their child to save herself from his world, Diane whispered, "That's when I understood her." It was as if art had come full circle, mirroring life. The battle behind her final years wasn't about fame or legacy. It was about reconciliation, with the choices she made, the love she lost, and the woman she ultimately became. And that's when everything changed again, because just weeks before her passing, Diane decided to make one last statement, not to the public, but to history. The interview that aired posthumously on October 15th was unlike anything Diane Keaton had ever given. She appeared frailer, her voice softer, but her mind still razor sharp. "I've said enough about movies," she began. "Let's talk about people, the ones we love and can't fix." Then, without prompting, she spoke Al Pacino's name. "Al taught me that love isn't about changing someone. It's about standing near them while they try to change themselves." She laughed, almost apologetically. He never did, of course, but I loved him anyway. For the first time, Diane admitted that their breakup had not been mutual. "He left," she said simply. "He couldn't handle the version of me that wanted everything: a home, kids, peace. He needed chaos to feel alive." There was no anger in her tone, only understanding. What struck viewers most was her compassion. She spoke of how Pacino had called her years later, thanking her for believing in him when he doubted himself. "We were kids who got famous too fast," she said, "and sometimes fame freezes you at the age it finds you." That one line became the interview's heartbeat. By the end, she leaned closer to the camera and whispered, "Tell him I forgive him." It wasn't performative, it was liberation. After the segment aired, social media flooded with tributes. Even Pacino released a brief statement through his publicist. "Diane was one of the truest souls I ever knew. Our history is ours, and I'll cherish it forever. It was the first time he had publicly addressed their relationship in over 30 years. For those who'd grown up watching them, Kay and Michael, Diane and Al, it felt like closure for an entire generation. But the story didn't end there. Because behind the forgiveness lay a deeper truth Diane had been holding for decades. And it would rewrite what we thought we knew about her all along. When people thought of Diane Keaton, they pictured the quirky hats, the layered suits, the laugh that bounced like jazz. But beneath that style icon was a woman shaped by contradictions. The truth, as her letters reveal, was that independence was the only language she was offered. If you want to keep a man like Al, she wrote in one note, you have to stop needing him. That realization became both her armor and her prison. Though it was thought, their relationship ended cleanly. In reality, it lingered in quiet gestures. When Pacino filmed Scent of a Woman in New York, she sent flowers anonymously to his trailer White Lilies, his favorite. He later found out and called her, but neither said the words that mattered. They reconnected briefly in 2017 at a charity gala in Los Angeles. Witnesses say they spent nearly an hour talking privately in a corner. It was like time folded, one attendee recalled. They looked like two people who'd finally stopped pretending they were over it. It was speculated that Diane regretted never marrying. Far from it. She often joked, I avoided a lot of bad furniture that way. But privately, she wrote, I had the kind of love most people only get once. Why would I trade that memory for convenience? Each revelation painted a more intricate portrait of a woman who lived by paradox, who built walls but filled them with light. According to close friends, Al Pacino was aware of her final interview before it aired. He reportedly sent flowers to her home the week before she died, a small gesture, but one that suggested mutual peace. Her family has chosen not to release the notes to Al's memoir in full, but excerpts confirmed her unwavering affection. You'll always be my unfinished sentence, one line reads. It's easy to romanticize tragedy, but Diane never wanted that. She wanted truth, the messy, human, unfinished kind. And if you're wondering what that truth ultimately was, it might be this. Diane Keaton's greatest love story wasn't about getting the man, it was about learning to live without him, and still love him anyway. After Diane's passing, tributes poured in from every corner of Hollywood. Actors she had mentored spoke of her generosity. Directors called her fearless. Yet amid all the praise, one theme echoed authenticity. She had built a career on being unapologetically herself. In an era that rewarded conformity, she redefined femininity. Her wide-brimmed hats, her refusal to age quietly, her delight in awkwardness, all of it was rebellion wrapped in kindness. But her legacy wasn't just style, it was substance. In her lifetime, she championed female directors, preservation of historic architecture, and young artists. She raised 2 children as a single mother while continuing to work in an industry that often punishes women for aging. And even in her relationship with Al Pacino, her influence endured. Those who know him say he spoke of her often in private, describing her as the conscience of the Godfather. At her memorial service in Los Angeles, friends read passages from her books, Then Again, and Brother and Sister, alongside one unpublished line from her final writings, If love is memory, then I've lived a lifetime inside one. That sentiment captured what millions felt watching her films, that she had given permission to be imperfectly human. Her children have since announced plans to establish the Keaton Foundation, dedicated to arts education and architectural conservation, 2 passions that defined her later years. And while the world mourned her death, Al Pacino's silence afterwards spoke louder than any eulogy. He did not attend public ceremonies, choosing instead, according to friends, to send a private note to her family. The content remains undisclosed, but one line reportedly read, She changed the way I saw myself. Perhaps that was her final legacy, not fame, not accolades, but transformation. Because Diane Keaton didn't just act, she taught us how to inhabit contradictions, how to laugh while breaking, how to forgive without forgetting, how to love without possession, and that's what remains long after the lights go down. So what did Diane Keaton's final words about Al Pacino really mean? They weren't about rekindling romance or rewriting history. They were about release. For 50 years, she carried a love story that never had an ending. In speaking about it before her death, She gave it one not in reunion, but in understanding. She recognized that what bound them wasn't failure, it was recognition. Two people who saw the same loneliness in each other, but couldn't solve it. In the end, her message was less about Al Pacino and more about all of us, about the way time turns even heartbreak into grace if we let it. Her confession invited viewers to rethink what closure looks like. It isn't always grand gestures. Sometimes it's a whisper caught on camera, a sentence like, "Tell him I forgive him." Those 5 words carried decades of ache, laughter, and growth. In life, Diane Keaton taught us to celebrate imperfection. In death, she reminded us that love, no matter how unfinished still, leaves light behind. Maybe that's why her story resonates so deeply, because everyone has a version of the one that got away. Everyone knows what it's like to love someone who can't meet you halfway and to do it anyway. She didn't die with regrets. She died having made peace with her past. And through that peace, she gave her audience one final gift, the courage to face our own. Now, if you're wondering what Al Pacino felt when he heard her words, maybe it's not for us to know. Maybe that's between them, somewhere beyond the reach of cameras where art and life finally meet. In the quiet hours after her funeral, fans gathered outside the Godfather house in Staten Island, leaving flowers, hats, and handwritten notes. One read, "You taught us how to love and let go." Somewhere in Beverly Hills, the light from her old balcony still spills across the empty chair where she once sat watching the sunset. And in that fading glow, her voice lingers soft, amused, eternal. "Tell him I forgive him." Because in the end, forgiveness wasn't her farewell. It was her legacy.